Imagine having the life of your dreams. Not temporary cash and glory, but happiness and inner peace. Explore new ways to be a creator and take your own journey into greatness. Is it possible? What does it take to make that happen? It takes the person known for extreme results. He's called the cage breaker and the ultimate catalyst. Coming back from the brink of death and now crushing it for himself and his clients, this is Your Ultimate Life Podcast with Kellen Flukiger.
All right. Here we are once again, working on your ultimate life. I don't know about you, but I work on that every day. I work on my ultimate life every day. And what do I mean by that? Not just doing podcasts and stuff, but here's the deal. The ultimate life is not a destination. It's a process. And you might think that ultimate life, you signify it when all your bills are paid, you don't have to work, it's $1 million in the bank and $1 billion in the bank, and you do whatever you want. I don't know. I've never had $1 billion in the bank, but I've had time when I had millions. And that wasn't the happy time in my life. So ultimate life is having a purpose. Prosperity is necessary and good, but prosperity is so much more than cash. So ultimate life, a life of purpose, prosperity and joy. And how do you get it? You get it by serving with your divine gifts. And that might sound, crazy. Well, I need to build a business and I need to or if I work for a job, I need to get up in the company and get a bunch of promotion, a bunch of stock options and this and that and the other. And you know what? Cash is fun. Cash buys access. Cash lets you enjoy your favorite misery and all the rest. But that is not the ticket to the ultimate life. It's fun, but not happy. So let's get to some really important things in the pillar of truth. Today, we are working on the pillar of truth, and today is the 5th episode, the fourth stone in the pillar of truth. Now, we talked about truth was foundational. We talked about truth being factual. We talked about truth being perceptual. And we dug through all those very thoroughly. Today, we're going to talk about truth being principle. Now, you might immediately say, wait a minute. Principles, aren't those just ideas we believe in and not fundamental foundational truth? And that is where the rub is, because it's both. There are eternal principles. There are things that no matter what we do, we can't change them, that are not just facts like the speed of light in a vacuum. Those facts are useful and they're interesting and they govern a lot of our physical world. But what are the things that govern the spiritual world? What are things that govern that stuff we can't measure in the lab? And that's where this comes in. Truth is principle, and the principle is the English word that we have for it, but those principles are just as powerful, just as real, and just as absolute as the speed of light in a vacuum or whatever, right? And we say all those scientific things as if they're absolutes, and then 20 years go by and we've redefined our understanding of subatomic particles, and the standard model is still holding up. But I saw an article the other day that said, I don't know, there's a particle behavior that now can't quite be explained, and we're looking for the grand unification theory and all the rest of it. And if you read about quantum physics and all that jazz, you know what I mean, and if you don't, so what? So let's talk about how to create your ultimate life of purpose, prosperity, and joy by serving with your divine gifts, which is what this is about. And let's talk about guiding truth. What I know is if you don't guide your life by truth, you'll end up in a dead-end alley. If you don't guide your life by things that are real and true and permanent and long-term, you end up, again, being abandoned and crushed by those things. Truth doesn't change. Truth stays permanent. Eternal truth. So let's dive in. There's 3 parts here. First of all, we're going to make sure we understand the facts, what truth is, like I said, speed of light or other things like that, gravitational constant and some other things. Then we're going to talk about the truths in the spiritual realm. And I'm going to talk about those just like these other scientific factual truths that we measure, wavelengths and other things like that. And those are principles. The principles are the facts of the spiritual realm. Some of the principles we'll talk about are integrity. Another principle that we'll talk about is love. Another principle we'll talk about is service and giving and forgiveness, and some other unbelievably powerful, eternal, and unchangeable principles that are the facts of the spiritual realm. And the third thing we're going to talk about is we're going to move it out of the discussion mode and into practical use with the question, do you live this? And how do you know whether or not you're living this? And if you're not living it to your satisfaction, maybe you're trying, and all of us, I'm trying, I am doing it. I declare it every day. We've talked a lot about morning ritual and stuff, and we'll get back to that later. But how do you change if there's something about your life, your behavior, your beingness that you don't like? You look in the mirror and you wish, I shouldn't do this or that, or say this or that, or be this or that way. How do you change that? Because that's what's really important. Establishing where we are right now is just the first piece. So back to factual truth. So we've listed all kinds of physical constants like the scientific things and the law of gravity and the behavior of electromagnetism. It's one of the funny things, I was in electricity for 30 years. I worked for a number of different utilities that provided electricity for the areas that they worked in. And then I worked in deregulation, where they tried to do with electricity in some areas what they did with cell phones. Like you can buy your telephone service from any provider that you want. Trying to do that with electricity is a little hard. First of all, there's wires. Nobody wants to build two sets of wires down the street. The second piece is the actual electrons. And those you can deregulate, but it's very complicated. Very difficult. So I'm not going to talk about electricity deregulation here. I spent a decade plus, 12, 13 years of my life buried in that. But here's what I know, and it's interesting. We know all about how to create electricity. We know about how to wire a house and create computers and electronics and everything else. And we know how to use it. We know it's predictable. We know exactly how it behaves. And we know how to use it in smaller and smaller things as we do micro-miniaturization and everything else. But we don't know? We actually don't know why electricity is produced. Like the basic rule is you take a piece of conductor, a piece of wire, and you move it through a magnetic field. Like if you had a horseshoe in one hand, like a horseshoe magnet, not a horseshoe, but horseshoe magnet, and you had a little piece of wire between your thumb and index finger in the other hand, and you move it in and out of the horseshoe, right? You're going across that magnetic field that's invisible, but it is the thing that is attractive, right? That action, moving a piece of wire through that magnetic field, makes electrons move in the wire from one end of the wire to the other. And which end they go to and which end they leave from depends on how the magnet's oriented and everything else. And if you move it faster, back and forth through that magnetic field, why it generates more electrons and everything else. So we know how much electricity it produces. We know how to move the magnets and put the wires stationary and move the magnets, or put the magnets stationary and move the wires. We know how fast to move it, and we know all that stuff. But we don't know. We don't know how come the electrons move. Like, why, when I move that piece of wire through that magnetic field, why do the electrons move? That is the fundamental question that underlies all of electricity, electronics, and everything else, is the fact that they do it in a predictable, reliable, reproducible way that underlies all of our electronics, but we have no idea why they do that. So fundamentally, we don't know how electricity works. We know what it does and how to use it, but not why it does that. That is a fact that is interesting in the factual stuff of science. Okay, so enough about that little interesting detour. So let's move from those facts which we build our life around to the squishy areas. Relationships with each other. Are you truthful? Do you live by truth and integrity? That used to be a massive problem for me. I was a liar. I lied when I was young to protect myself from physical punishment that was abusive. And I learned to lie really, really well. When I grew up, I had a habit of lying that I didn't even need to do, and I kept doing it. So I wasn't at all living by principles of honesty and integrity. I didn't get caught a lot, once in a while, but the most important thing was I didn't like myself, and I didn't trust myself. I knew that nothing I said could be depended on. I might promise myself I'd do a bunch of things, and then I didn't keep those promises. I'm going to quit this, especially when I had habits and, addictions that started to emerge. I'm going to quit. I'm going to do this, that, and the other. And I couldn't keep my word to myself. Integrity. I do what I say. I am who I seem to be, with no camouflage, no duplicity, no guile, which means, ulterior motives and stuff like that. So that's a principle that I live by now. Those principles are the foundation of eternal truth. Evil doesn't rule the universe. Love rules the universe. In the ultimate sense, if you want to get religious about it, God is more powerful than, the devil or the adversary or Satan or whatever you want to call it. Goodwill is triumph. Now, there's a bunch of nuances around that. This whole experience down here is about us getting some experience and learning to do what? To choose for ourselves. Well, in order for that to mean anything, there has to be an opportunity to choose negative stuff. We see that happening all over the place. People are mean to each other. There's cruelty. There's unkindness. There's slavery. There's abuse. There's all kinds of stuff, and God doesn't fix it all at the moment. But the fundamental thing is that justice eventually prevails, not in this little 60 or 70 or 80 years, but in the context of eternity. Love prevails, good prevails, justice prevails, and the principles of integrity, love, truth, honesty, giving, caring for one another, those things are more powerful and do, in fact, win. There is, in fact, actual justice, kindness, and truth at the end. Now, if this 100 years that we each have here, or 60 or 80 or whatever it is, if that's all there was, then there's massive unfairness, and we know that. But we also know we came from somewhere, and we know we're going somewhere. We close our eyes, and our energy, our spirit leaves the body. That's not the end, and we know that in our hearts. We don't know a lot about what comes next, but we know it. Now, I've had some fantastic experiences. I died and had a chance to have some conversations with God at the door between life and eternity. But that's really unusual. And if you want to read that, you can read about it in Meeting God at the Door. But that isn't why, it's a book on Amazon or my website, but that isn't why I know that. I know it from my own heart and feelings, just like you do. The makeup of this experience in life seems to be structured around use of choice, freedom, agency. We have to learn to do that, and then we make mistakes, and we have to fix those. Now that we truly, if we're honest, understand that those principles underpin truth and our ability to use power in a good way to add good to the world, then the real question is, do you live this? Are you living your life in accordance with things that you know and believe deep in your heart are true? I don't mean just the platitude, well, I'm a good person, I try to do good. I'm talking far beyond that. Are you committed to growing your life every day, to growing who you are being? It's easy enough to say, well, I'm a good person. I don't intentionally hurt anybody, and I don't, blah, blah, blah. There's way more that you're capable of doing. Now, nobody's going to make you. That's the thing about this choice thingy, right? If you want the palace of power, if you want truth, the truth of eternal principle operative in your life, so you can do, be, and have way more than you do now, and have that purpose, prosperity, and joy, then intentionally focusing on who you're being, living your life in accordance with those eternal things you know are true, that's really important. Now, when I ask that question, it's sometimes difficult to answer. Are you living in accordance with your principles? It's difficult to answer. So let's go to the next question, which is, how do you know that you are? Your challenge right now is to think of 10 examples in the last few days where you are clearly living in accordance with those principles and where you're not. Write them down. Here's where I did exactly what I believe, what I think, what I know is true and good, what that best version of myself would do. And here's where I didn't. Now, when you get to that point, it's not about recrimination and negativity and negative story. You know that. We've talked a lot about that. So how do you change? Well, this is what I believe self-development, personal development, coaching, and everything is all about. It's easy to find the answers to how do I find clients? What do I do to build a business? All that stuff is easy. That's information that's available. The reason that we don't do what we know is we do not live in accordance with the truth. I know I should be diligent. I know I should get up earlier. I know I should try harder. I know I should be honest. I know I should be kind, but I don't. And then we have stories about that. The key to change is the most important part of this. Whether you're in accordance with your own truths that you know inside or not right this minute, the most important thing is to make a commitment and create a process to change. The book of Context, which I referred to earlier, is one part. I have another book called Walking Without Fear. All of my coaching that I do for people is a little bit about getting a product, finishing the book, creating a new piece of business, growing your income. Those are all small goals compared to changing who you are, accepting and living in accordance with the truth you know about who you really want to be at the core. That is the way truth really moves you toward your ultimate life.
Open your heart and this time around.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. We hope that you take it deeply into your heart and decide for yourself how you can create anything you desire. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to this podcast and share it with your friends. As always, we'd love to hear your feedback and topic suggestions. Until tomorrow, this is Your Ultimate Life with host Kellen Flukiger.